Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And joining us on this episode is Noel Boyer. Welcome, Noel.
Hey, glad to come hang out with you guys for a minute.
Right on. And joining me, as always, is my trusted counterpart, Tony Tressalt. Hey, Tony.
Still here. Power outages and all. I'm still here.
Yeah, we had a power outage last episode. It interrupted it a bit, but it was all good. Well, Noel, we ask all of our guests one question. It's the only common theme to each episode is the first question, and then where it goes, nobody knows. So the question is, if you would share with us the first memory that you can recall of where you felt a connection to trees or a tree, what first comes to your mind as a profound memory of a connection.
I think it would have to be whenever I was 5 years old. We kind of lived in town here in Springfield, and my dad bought a property out in the country, 30 acres, a little mini farm, and we moved out there. Dad started to build a house and everything, and we lived in this absolute piece of crap mobile home with no flushing toilet while the house was getting built. But like the first thing that we did was start to get out there and work in the woods, cutting firewood and cutting out fence rows so that he could get fences put up. The goal with this little mini farm was to have, dairy goats and to have, some critters out there. And so right off the bat, at 5 years old, my dad would get home from work and we would go out there in the woods and it was, cutting and clearing fence lines and making firewood. But I just remember all the lessons that I learned out there about tree species. My dad was always interested in trees, and he was like teaching me the different species we had out there in the woods. And after a while I could really call them, and I think that was the tree work stuff came much, much later in life, but that was my first recollection of like really paying attention to the trees and kind of having some kind of a connection with them.
How interesting that, you mentioned it was some years later that like what a close connection to tree work that whole experience would have been, not just learning them, but cutting wood, clearing, like all of that is kind of an arboriculture relatable things, really, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And, even after we got the fences up and got the goats running out in the fields and everything, like I quickly learned, goats will eat about anything, as you probably know. They'll eat about anything. But I quickly learned that they had preferences, and there was all these little sapling trees out in the woods, and they would reach up and pick all the leaves off of them as high as they could.
Right.
But then I would get out there, after school or whatever, and climb up these little saplings and bend them over to the ground and let the goats, go wild on them. And I really quickly learned that, like, oh man, if you could pull over a sassafras tree, they would just go nuts over that. Or even some of the like small hickory trees, they really love that. And so, kind of started to figure out which trees were the most fun for me to bend over and pull down to the ground so the goats could nibble on them.
Interesting. Goats, I grew up on a farm too, and we had a mixed type farm, and Dad would always have a couple goats, and goats were fascinating of all the creatures, like their agility and and their friendliness, like they were almost like dogs. Like they would greet you, they would want to hang around with you. When we would open the trunk of the car, they'd jump up and they'd walk literally on the edge of the rubber of the trunk seal. Like they could just so agile. I don't know if you experienced that kind of stuff like that.
Oh yeah. We were out there on this rocky hillside and we would my dad would come home with those big, huge wooden spools that used to have whatever comm lines or whatever rolled up on them. And we'd roll those things out there into the goat pasture, and those goats would play King of the Hill for hours and hours and hours, jumping up onto those things, and they could stand right on the very edge of that thing.
Yeah.
Just those hooves would just get a hold of them, and they could stand right on the edge of anything.
Yeah, yeah. They always fascinated me more so than other farm animals. Like the sheep would never do that. Cattle didn't do that. Pigs, they all have their own interesting quirks, but goats seem to always to me have a bit more intelligence or something almost to them.
For sure, more personality.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're any smarter, but they for sure have more personality.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good memory to go back to for sure. You mentioned you made specific mention of not having a toilet in the trailer. You know, so I'm not. We don't need to get into details, but that's an interesting experience that was quite common for most people. Like anybody that hunts nowadays and stuff like that, when you're in the woods, you got to deal with what you got to deal with. But I find it's one of those things that a lot of people are disconnected with as far as the functionality of needing to take care of that sort of activity and where you go and get it done and where everybody tends to go, like it's just interesting because not everyone has that experience. And I think it somehow shapes you as a person. I don't know if that sounds weird, but
We were roughing it, and Dad, the house was under construction, and after we got the house built and everything, of course, we had flushing toilets and all
well,
that kind
yeah,
of stuff. But we just had a chemical toilet in the trailer because there was no septic system installed in
yeah.
the property yet, and so for months and months we used a chemical toilet, and I remember Dad carrying it down the hill and digging a hole and dealing with it. Because I'm one of four kids. It wasn't like there was any shortage of poop in our house. There was plenty of poop in our house, so it was a constant fight for Dad while the construction was going on.
Oh wow! So you had I was okay. Yeah, you didn't just go dig a hole with and put a seat on a chunk of wood or something.
No, we had the little indoor porta pot,
Yeah, yeah.
old
Well,
school.
but even that, like, there is a connection with that you have to. But Dad dealt with it, so it was good. So how did you progress? Like you mentioned, there was a hiatus. Were you not destined for the trees right away? Then how did that all come to pass?
Well, I think that if you ask probably 90% of tree guys and tree women and tree people, uh, was this the plan? I would bet that 90% of them would say, nope, I accidentally landed here. And that's how it happened for me too. I never meant to be doing this. Got got through high school, got through college, got a degree in psychology, and realized that a bachelor's degree in psychology is you can't do much with that. And they were trying to goad me on to, like, you need to get into a master's program and get going on research and this and that. And I was like, you know what, I don't want to do that. And in 1995 I got my degree, and I saw an ad in the paper for a local tree service here in Springfield, Missouri, that was needing ground help, and I walked in the door and applied for the job. $7 an hour, and that was the start. I got the job for $7 an hour with a college degree in psychology, and absolutely thought that it was just a temporary stepping stone, kind of a stopgap, just to figure out what I was going to do. And like it happens with all of us, there's something that clicks, something that grabs a hold of you, and the next thing you know, you just can't get away from it. It locks you down.
Yeah, I totally relate, and I'm sure many of our listeners do as well. How what I'm just going to probe on that for a bit because I'm genuinely curious, and I I think many people are like, what do you think it is? Like, I remember in the Legends of Arboriculture video, Larry Hall, he went so far as to say he believes that anyone that stays in the arborist industry for a decade or so, that something's imparted mystically by the trees. Like, what is it that is it the trees? Is it spiritual? Is it just physical? Is it both? Is it like, how would you describe what happens to those of us that never have left?
Well, this may be a disappointing answer, because I think that other people probably feel more connected spiritually or emotionally, or they're in tune, or they're hearing, the trees talk to them or whatever. And for me, it was definitely that it was what it comes down to is just that I was good at it, and you like doing things that you know that you're really good at. My boss back then, he immediately started to train me. He got me, up to speed on. I'd been running a chainsaw for my whole childhood or whatever, but boned me up on some safety with that, and then the next thing you know, he's like, "All right, here's a saddle, here's a rope, follow me," and we'd head up a tree, and he taught me how to climb. And I'd only been doing that for a year or two, and then what really was the lock-in for me was my boss said, "Hey, there's going to be this tree climbing competition in St. Louis. It's 3 hours away.
Yeah.
Let's go up there and see what it's all about." And this is in 1997.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Let's go see what it's all about. And by the way, I signed you up." And I was like, "Oh, well, I was like, I'm going to go. And I don't have any idea like what the rules are. I don't know anything about this, but I was like, I guess let's go." And so showed up at the first Midwest Tree Climbing Championship in 1997 and had no idea what it was about, but they gave me a rule book and I read through it real quick, and
Yeah.
just kind of got to watch other people. And actually, believe it or not, I won the work climb in
Wow.
1997. My first go, 2 years into being a tree dude, and so that was the moment. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, this is a fun game that really relates to what I'm out here doing every day, and I can learn how to be a good tree guy, and I can play this game too.
Yeah.
And so that was really the beginning of the lock-in.
Uh-huh.
It was definitely more of a the adventure of going to these climbing competitions and being competitive was actually more than me being spiritual with the trees, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and some would argue there's a spiritual component to that. Like I remember, you've jogged my memory on. I don't. I think I was kind of, because I was what 19 or something and working at a landscape. Well, it was like a Chemlon type company. And I was running a spray truck, like just a lawn spray thing, right? But it was outside work, and I was having fun, and but they had this tree division, but you had to be with the company a long time. And anyway, some past experiences and different circumstances, I ended up being invited into the tree department abnormally early than most because of some past work experience and so on. And I got introduced to climbing, and the same thing. There was this competition, right? And I got asked, and I had been competitive in wrestling all through university, high school, and done quite well. So those days were past. I didn't have, and I'd always been in either sports of some type, football, wrestling, something. But now there was a stopgap. I wasn't competing, and then there was this competition. Like, oh, maybe there's something. And then there was even an international competition, like potential to go. And I'm like, wow, that would be cool. I could another chance to go to on a world stage to compete at something, right? And figured I could have how man, I wouldn't be better than anybody else because I got all this wrestling background, which really served really virtually very little other than strength, perhaps, and so on. Because tree climbing competitions are so devastatingly unique compared to most other competitions, and but you're right. It had a big influence for me too. Was just that aspect of it was that I can have fun doing this, and there's that always that next year goal of like winning and then going to the big smoke, as I used to call it.
Oh yeah,
So,
and actually, like I would say that first competition in '97 was what really grabbed a hold of me. But then I competed at the Midwest chapter for 20 years straight. I didn't miss a year for 20 years straight, and I was very fortunate to like that. I went to that one in '97, and then in 1998, the next year, I came ready. I had read the rule book, I had studied it. I can't say that I really like trained or practiced, but I understood the rules for damn sure.
yeah.
And then I did actually win the Midwest in '98 and got to go to England,
Okay. Yeah.
and went to the Big Smoke in England, and I ended up in 20 years of competing at the Midwest, I won 7 times, and so that was the constant fire. It was like
Right.
this thing that's like, all right, I totally ate shit this year, but next year I'm gonna come back because nobody other than Mark Chisholm just gets to win every year. Every year, like he was so reliably consistent, every year, and I would walk in and just like stink the place up some years, but
Yeah, yeah,
some years I did really good.
yeah, yeah. That's where we met because I was in England in '98 as well. So we would have been
Yep.
competing there together, going back that far. And that was I don't know if that was my first or second. No, because I competed. The first one I ever competed in was in Bismarck, North Dakota, which I can't remember what year that was. But anyways, so but you have you're like, how did you make the transition out of competition, or have you?
No, I'm not. Well, the year that I competed all the way up till 2016, and I figured it was time for me to get out of the way and step to the other side of the clipboard, so to speak. So
Yeah,
since 2017, I've been helping to run the Midwest Tree Climbing Championship every year, and
yeah,
competed at ITCC numerous times as well, and or not competed, but volunteered at
yeah,
ITCC. So I haven't quit the climbing competition. I still take a ton of my guys to at least a
yeah,
couple of them every year.
yeah,
So I'm still very involved in that, and it's definitely part of our company culture that I don't ever want to lose.
yeah. You know about that, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that because I really think, well, the giving back aspect. It was, I think it was kind of instilled in me. That like by Ken and Rip for sure because they were so involved and retired like after I was starting to compete, and then I competed quite a bit while I worked with them. But what comes from volunteering and helping people, whether it be a competition or anything, but particularly at the competition, and I guess I'm going to soapbox here a little bit. Like I feel like there's a lot of people that just they walk away and you never see them again, and they would have so much to offer if they were to take some time to give of themselves and their time in a volunteer capacity to be on the other side of the clipboard, as you say. Um, is there any encouragement or anything you can offer? Do you think that that's something we should, or could see more of?
Well, everybody has limited bandwidth, so I understand if you feel maxed out, but if you have been somebody that has been privileged enough to, you know, receive all that you gain from going to these tree climbing competitions through the years, and honestly, I got so much from it. Not just the ability to do work more safely or to be more effective or efficient, but like lifelong friendships. And I mean, I feel like the gains that I've taken from the TCC community have been huge, overwhelming almost. And so it felt wrong to me to just like step away and then not be one of the people that's putting it back into the next people and the next people. And so I, I felt an obligation. Um, Not that I don't enjoy it. I obviously I love doing it, or else, because sometimes my bandwidth runs really lean right now too. I've just got a lot of irons in the fire, but I still make time for that because I feel like it is one of our first core value in our company is be influential, and like this is one opportunity for me to put my mouth where my money is, or put my money where my mouth is,
Yeah.
and just like say, hey, this is a chance for us to go and like get some of these young guys. They're like last year at the Midwest Comp, I think we had 10 or 11 first timers.
Wow.
And I was like, this is our chance. We get to draw these people in right now and hope that it bites them the same way it bit me back in 1997.
Yeah. 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 And it really is, really is professional development anyway, and not only giving back and helping others, but it is a win-win situation. I remember one of our instructors, James Lucha. Oh, you probably remember James. He would often say, like, in regards to why he liked to teach and even help at the comps and so on, is he said there was a selfish component to it. Like as much as he liked helping others, he loved what he got from it. And he acknowledged that. Like he made a point to acknowledge it. He said, this isn't just me going helping people. He says, I get a whole ton out of this that helps me. And that's partly why I love to do it too. And he always made a point to mention that because, and I think that's something that maybe not everyone understands is how much you actually do get from it yourself personally, helping other people. You know, it's a weird thing, you know, how would that work?
Yeah. I mean, it's never my intention to go to one of these and, you know, feel like I'm just doing it all for me. I want to do it for everybody else too. But there is definitely a component of like the satisfaction and joy that you get from having influence in whatever little way it is. You know, maybe you help somebody learn a new technique, or maybe somebody learn a new trick, or maybe they understood the rules better. But also maybe you know, you connected with somebody who was maybe on the outside and who just needed to make a connection with somebody else as a friend. You know, you just never know where people are, but it's always good to just be there and available to them.
Yeah. You know, Tony, you talk about that a lot where you found, um, uh, I was going to say a brotherhood, but a brotherhood and a sisterhood. I don't want to be exclusive there, but compared when, because of your background with the military.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the climbing competition was much like Noel. I had seen climbing competitions through the 80s when I was younger because my dad was involved, but I didn't want to be an arborist, so I didn't pay attention. Just getting drug along to work with my dad again. But like when I started, I think 98 was the first time I went to international, and that would have, no, had to be 99 because that it was in Stamford, Connecticut. Because when that like the 75th anniversary or something for ISA, something like that.
Yeah.
And I just went to watch. And then that was the last one I went to and watched for almost 25 years. I think it was 2023. I was up at the Pacific Northwest. I was speaking at the conference there, and they had the competition before the conference. And I didn't have anything to do. I was in town a day early, so I just went out and I wandered around watching them set up a climbing comp. And it occurred to me this is the first time, like in 25 years, I've ever been here and I didn't have a job. Like it was kind of nice, actually. It was kind of. I felt kind of lonely though too. It felt kind of uninvolved, but no, it was great. It was for me getting involved. I competed for like 12 years. And it was fine. I lost way more than I won, but I tell people now, and it was hands down the best training you could get because even when like my employer, even if I had to pay my own entrance fee, it was still cheap because where else could you go and watch a really good climber climb a tree? And then you go climb the exact same tree on the exact same route, and then you could sit down and chat about it, right? And for the longest time, that drove me. And then sometime around 2011, 2012, I realized I was having more fun volunteering than I was competing. So I just stopped competing. I competed last time, I think 2011, something like that. And then continued to volunteer. And for the longest time, I had the best tree volunteer job in the world. I was the head technician in the work climb and the in-tree tech and the master challenge. It was awesome. You couldn't get a better job than that. And I just learned so much from that. And just, like Noel said, lifelong friendships, connections that have benefited me personally as well as professionally. I can't even really quantify it. It would be quite the tree if I were to draw it out, like a family tree, starting at the root there and going out.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the impetus a little bit behind the name and our slogan, the Human Forestry Podcast, because I think we really are this human forest of people that have, a lot of us tap into the competition as part of our source and where our connection began, but it doesn't end there. Like it goes, when I think of you these days, Noel, interestingly enough, I always think of fishing. And because I see your posts, that's mostly the interaction where I see you is smiling either on the water or with a fish in the hand or both. Because you do a lot of that too.
Well, somebody's got to do something to stay sane. It's when life is crazy, um, I I absolutely end up well. We 15 minutes from my house, I've got this little cabin on the most beautiful secret stretch of river, and it's not really open to public access unless somebody wants to do a lot of work. And so I always feel like I kind of own the place, and and I go there every Sunday. Yesterday it was 11 degrees and the wind chill was below zero. And I went to the river yesterday. I go every Sunday. Usually it's me and a couple of buddies. We call it going to church.
Yeah.
And I go to the river on Sundays and I get right. It's, everybody has their own ways, and that is the way that I get right every week and rebuild my energy to go, headlong into Monday the next week. So,
Yeah.
and, if you want to know the truth, I'm a terrible fisherman. You put a fishing rod in a monkey's hand and they throw a lure in the water, they're going to get one every now and then. And I'm a complete monkey with a fishing pole. I'm not really skilled. I don't know much about it, but I just know that being there is what fixes me every week.
Yep. Yep. So at what point did you realize that was something you needed or you appreciated? Like were you always like that, or did something happen, or what drew you to that? Not necessarily the pond, but where you go, but that that you needed that recharge or that moment of rest.
I think we're all aware that, we burn ourselves out, and, when you're running a business and, my wife is a medical professional and we've got 2 kids and, for, their entire childhood. And, even though I would try to be present for everything, I was and still am a big, stupid workaholic. I just have a really hard time stepping away from it ever. And it's one of my own struggles, and I'm aware of it. I just need to be better at stepping away from it. But, that we had, this is a little cabin community. They've been there since, 100 years. These little cabins were built in the 30s. It was kind of a vacation weekender kind of cabin community, 15 miles outside of town. But I had been doing tree work in there for many of the people, and I just thought, my God, this place is paradise. And I started asking my customers every time I go out there to do tree work. I was like, if you hear of anything, well, all of the cabins are generational. They never, ever come up for sale. They're never listed. And I kept asking for probably 10 years. And one of my customers said, hey, there's kind of an abandoned cabin up on the hillside, but the people that own it haven't been here in 20 years and they're going to put it up to auction. And I was like, okay, here we go. And I showed up to the auction, and, my wife had given me kind of a number that I could see to go towards. And I overran that number by about 50%, and I still didn't get it. I lost. And that was the only cabin in there that had come up for sale in, God knows how many years. So what happened is, one of my customers down there, as I was walking away dejected, he's like, hey, if I was you, there's one cabin, back down at the end of the road down there that is owned by a local church, and they don't do anything with it. Somebody gifted it to the church 10 years ago, and they haven't done a thing with it, and it's kind of falling in, and it's junk, And so I just kind of followed that lead and came in the back door and got that little cabin. And, it took some work to get it up to where it wasn't going to fall down. And it's a cabin. I mean, there's no heat, no air. It does have a water and flushing toilet for about 7 or 8 months of the year, but it's super cabiny.
Yeah, yeah.
And whenever I, finally worked my way in the back door there and just started going there on the weekends and stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been missing. And I gave $40,000 for this little falling in cabin, but I didn't care about that. I wanted the access to that beautiful, incredible spring-fed stretch of river. That's what I wanted. And so I just got really lucky to have even wiggled in that back door.
So how do you describe if you may, I mean, this is personal and take it for whatever it's worth, however you can. How do you describe what happens and what takes place to you in that moment where when you're there? Like, what is it? The smells? Is it the sounds? Is it there? Is there how does the energy flow into you?
It's kind of like, I don't know how the energy flows into me, but I can tell you that whenever it happens, like, it's not like I pull up down at the river and I hop on my little, pontoon raft with a trolling motor on it.
Yeah.
I've got this trolling motor that has GPS, and so you like push the button
Yeah.
and it just like slowly goes up the river for, about a mile, and goes right past all my little fishing holes. And so every week I go down there and I do that. I get on the river and I push the little button and I'm starting to go up the river. And the timing is different every week. Sometimes it's, when I just like step out onto this raft and I just sit down and look down into the water, and you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
You feel it. Just, there's something that resolves, and
Yeah.
the anxiety kind of like gets flushed down into the water, and down at the river it goes. And other times, if I'm all wound up and I'm on brain churn, and I'm trying to, like, come on, Noel, like, turn it down, turn it down, turn it down. And eventually, sometimes I'm halfway up the river, all the way up there, and then I can feel it come over me. And I really can't explain it any other way than it's different every time, but there is this event every Sunday when I get there where I feel something wash away.
Nice. Well, it sounds very meditative. It sounds a lot like meditation in a way, and even prayer in a way, and a certain element of it, right? And I don't espouse those terms to a specific discipline or religion, like and I think nature was the original church of all, and I think is for many of us, no question, especially tree people, because we have this innate connection sort of to nature anyway. I think a lot of us do. I think it's, and also it's is affected somewhat by our age, and our perspective changes with that too, doesn't it?
Well, if you're calling me old, then yes.
Because like when I was in '98 in Birmingham, and I almost fell out of the tree testing the new lock jack. I wasn't. A story like this wouldn't have been as moving to me as listening to you tell it now. And it's not because it wouldn't have been an important story. It's just I was in a different place.
Well, and I don't know if we're going to move on from the climbing comps, but I will say that I've been on Tony's team at ITCC before, and being the head judge or head tech of work climb is, that is one of the greatest positions. But a couple of times that I've worked with Tony at ITCC, I have had the very rare privilege of being the tech in the tree, in the work climb, and in the Masters Challenge. And I'd have to like scour my brain here to remember which year it was, because it's not on the tip of my tongue. But one of my, I've had some really exciting, fun wins, climbing competitions through all the years. But one of those years, I was the tech in the tree at the work climb, and I got to be the guy that greeted every single climber when they got to the top of the work climb, make sure that they were tied in, make sure that their hitches were working, make sure, I was the guy that was tasked with making sure that everybody was safe and tied in and ready to go. And I made sure that while everybody was up there, once all of that was settled, to just say, how's your day going? Well, would you like to, while we're waiting for them to mop up the ring down there, anything special about, the way your day is going today, or tell me what you've struggled with today or whatever. Just had a quick conversation to kind of like take everybody's mind off the anxiety of getting ready to, blow that horn and go. And at the end of the day, that day, what easily probably my top memory of arboriculture and being in the tree climbing championships, but they were announcing the Spirit of Competition award. And that year, they said my name, and I've got my little, acorn that has Bruce Smith in it. And it is one of my greatest treasures. It's such a great treasure that I know that this probably isn't the right thing to do, but I don't even like leave it sitting out because I've got it in my fireproof safe in my house. It's so valuable that I
Yeah.
really freak out about thinking about what if my house burns down and that goes away.
Right.
And, Bruce Smith was such a huge influence on everybody in our industry. And to know that I was recognized for that award has always been probably my number one. I went up there and I got the award and everything, and I walked away from there and I had to like leave the crowd and walk around behind the bank of, porta pots there and just break down and blubber and cry because it was so, that was so emotional to
Uh-huh.
be recognized, with the spirit of that competition. So probably my proudest moment in arboriculture.
That's beautiful. And, Bruce is well deserved of that honor, and that I think he would be I'm sure he's very pleased to and honored and humbled to have that, that award so attached to him, yeah, he was, yeah, lots of memories flood through my mind listening to you tell that. Um, what is it that, you know, that when what, how am I going to put this? Not everybody would be a technician that would take the time, obviously make sure everything's safe, but then take the time to invest a little bit into each person like that. Where does that come from for you? Where did you learn that, or has it always been in you?
Oh, I remember that being done for me.
Okay.
Whenever I was going to climbing comps, if you get up to the top of the work climb tree and you're anxious and you're trying to get yourself to simmer down and work your plan. There's been numerous times that there's been somebody waiting up at the top of that tree with a smile and something nice to say and just kind of a check-in with you to make sure that you're tuned in. What you don't want to do is have somebody up there in the climbing competition that's getting ready to go that's doesn't have their mind right, that they're freaked out or panicked or too worked up. You need somebody that's got their brain on so that they don't make a mistake and become the reason that we can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it while you were talking there, I wonder how I mean, I believe that the person in that position was also at one point a climber. I don't think we've ever would have had a tech in the tree that couldn't relate from the climber perspective ever. Right. So
No.
like, which gives you, there's no way you'd be able to relate. Have you not done that? Like understand what it feels like to, be up in rotation, have your name called, get hooked up, climb up there, get ready. I remember that was one of my most nervous part was getting up in the tree. I hated, because I came from when before we did the masters like that, or before we did the work climb from in the tree, you had to, so getting in the tree and then waiting to go was like, I just spent half my energy. Like I had to get up here, but for me, that was always an anxiety creating activity for me, which is weird. That was my problem. But, having someone up there that understands where you're coming from, right, is so valuable.
Yeah. I can't remember ever having, somebody being tech in the tree at the work climb that wasn't also a competitor. I think that's kind of a critical part of that position.
Yeah. And it's part of why it's important to give back, and to go back and, you have so much to offer having been a competitor, right? It's one of the things that makes it, you're not just an average volunteer when you go back after competing for some time. You just have a completely different perspective, a very valuable perspective, in fact. Yeah.
Well, and I just remember all the years that I competed, whether it was intentional or not, I always felt like all of the volunteers, the judges, the techs, the people that set it all up, I felt like they had made this day for me. They had done everything they could to make sure that, we could come out and have a great day. And so whenever now I'm on the other side and whenever we're setting up these events, I hope that everybody that comes to the, natural state or the Midwest Tree Climbing Championship that I'm helping to set up a run, I hope that they feel like it's their special day. That's the that's the goal, is to make them feel like everything that is happening here today is done for you.
Um, one of the questions we sometimes ask, or not always, but sometimes is how do you feel that being in trees, not just the comp, but as a tree worker, a business owner, working with trees and people that own trees and arborists, and do you feel that's had an influence not just on your business life, but also your personal life in some way? Like, have you drawn parallels into how you deal with life situations based on lessons maybe learned either being a tree person from being a tree person?
I mean, if you've been in the tree business for 30 years, like I have, and you haven't picked up some life lessons, you have really screwed up. Um, it's I mean, there's just so many of them. There's, the lessons of the rewards that you get for your efforts. There's lessons. A lot of mine have been in patience. I've sure had to learn a lot of life lessons about patience. And fortunately, I've got two daughters who, honest to goodness, like, we never fought with the girls. They're just like smart, sharp, hardworking, responsible kids, and they never gave us a lick of trouble. And um, so I feel like, more than my own daughters, who usually are the ones that would test a dad's patience, it's definitely been my employees. I've had to really learn to be more patient, to be more understanding, to give grace whenever it's needed, and also have learned when it's time to put the patience away and send somebody to their destiny. It's there's there's just a lot out there, and to try to compile all of that into a couple of sentences would be pretty hard, but I could just about write a book.
So we mentioned patience specifically. How can you give any examples of I'm how trees have taught you patience? Then,
Uh, well, I don't know if it's the trees or if it's the tree work.
okay,
And you know, I've got trees that I've planted at my own house that, I've got these asshole neighbors behind me with a barking dog, and I've planted these trees to try to screen them out. And so, right now those trees are testing my patience. I'm like, you need to hurry up and grow, because I'm tired of looking at and seeing my stupid neighbor here. But I think that the lessons have been, maybe maybe not as much from the trees themselves, but from the people that have worked with me on them. That, and or the people that have helped me to get better at this. I think that there's a lot out there, but I think I've definitely gained more from the people I've been around than from maybe having some relationship with the trees themselves.
yeah. Well, and I mean, I think you're talking very much about the human forest, right? Like that's exactly the. It's all these different species. We're not different species, but different personality types and traits that we interact with that are, that make up who we end up becoming in a way. Our last guest, we talked a little bit about the hardships and how struggles and difficulties create change, in us and so on. And even, I draw parallels from that with trees. We talked about trees that have been damaged in storms and then watching them progress into a functional trees and they get preserved because someone cared and wanted them, loved them despite the fact they were half ripped in half or whatever sort of thing, right? And how there is parallels in us as people like that too, you know.
Well, yeah, trees can definitely show you some things about resilience, and we've had, here in Springfield, Missouri, we live right dead center in Tornado Alley and Ice Storm Alley, and
Wow.
we get all kinds of that crap through here. And we had like the mother of all ice storms in 2007 here, and it wrecked every tree in town. And I just remember thinking, this place is never going to be the same. Like, it's just, there's no way that these trees can recover from this amount of damage. But you know, we followed the guidelines that the professionals had coached me on, and every time that we showed up and people were like, these trees are beat up and I want them gone, I was like, I I got to stop you. Let's get the busted cut out of this and let this tree have a chance. And I promise you that 4 or 5 years from now, you're gonna call me over so that you can hug and kiss me. Be, and I just damn near refused to cut down a tree unless it was just totally hopeless. And it's incredible, 5 years later, the trees had recovered in an incredible way and
Yeah.
grown back to the point where we did get calls all the time from people saying, I called you out here to cut this tree down and you just about refused to do it. You did refuse to do it. And you cut all the broken out of this thing. And now look what I've got in my yard. It's incredible. It's amazing that this tree is recovered. And I just thank you so much for not, succumbing to my wishes on that.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of my lessons I learned was sometimes it's time to be stubborn.
Right. Right. And do you think the trees are even, they're not, obviously they wouldn't be the exact, like they're not the same shape and form they would have been had the ice storm not occurred, but the form that has evolved since is unique and quite beautiful in and of itself. And, it even bears witness to the ice storm. You have this unique characteristics now that are as a result of what happened, right?
Oh yeah. Well, and not that it's nothing, but while have been so busy trying to preserve these trees that just got destroyed in these ice storms, it's not that I ever want that to happen because it's horrible for the urban forest, but as a business owner, it also creates a lot of opportunity, and I don't mean like opportunity like to storm chase or to take advantage of a situation or anything like that, but whenever these trees recover from this kind of bad damage, you know you're messing up if you don't go back, if the customer will let you 5 or 6 years later and fix a few things. There's some opportunity there with crown restoration that you can really take a tree that you thought would never be okay ever again, and with a little bit of knowledge and care and love and technique, you can get them back to just almost as good as they ever were.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that, my experience has been always been that less is more in that situation, particularly like get rid of the damage and the unsafe stuff, let, obviously there's often a proliferation of suckers and shoots and epicormics or whatever you want to call them. And then like not be so quick to go and thin those, like to give it some time. And I find 3 to 5 years, it would be, in my experience, the kind of the minimum, three, the minimum, where how many of the epicormics are shed or they just stop growing, and a few are selected that I'm going to say by the tree, and they end up becoming the ones that take over, and it becomes pretty obvious after 3 to 5 years, the longer the better really, which ones are going to take over and fill those holes that were created, so to speak, or become more dominant leaders in the canopy. And it makes the restoration become quite easy, in fact, because it almost shows you which ones to ultimately prune off later on. Do you find that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. The trees make a lot of the decisions on their own, and then you just go up and do the touch up work. It's, I think that to go in 3 years after a tree has lost 50% of its canopy and start taking away the epicormic growth, I think that's too early. That tree is still trying to crank out some food factory, man. It's hungry and it's still trying to produce enough leaf mass that it can generate the food that it needs. So I think that 5 years after a major event like that is a good time to go start doing some touch up work.
Yep. That I would feel very similar to that. And that, speaking of patience, right? It is, trees are to me, a real example of that. Like, first of all, they outlive us by quite a substantial amount. Even the shorter lived species, they still well outlive us typically. And they have to deal with many a challenge and weather event, which, I equate kind of weather events to life events that really shake our foundations, right? That happen to us all. They're common to us all. And then, it, just like trees, it takes time to recover. And there's a lesson in that patience, in that example of, if we pay attention to it, or we're able to see it. And, maybe someone can draw that parallel themselves after listening to our conversation. But time is a real key element in that,
For sure.
I'd say that the old saying that time heals all things. I think there's some element of truth in that. I think there's also some action required, but certainly time's is a critical component. Tony, you've been listening a lot this episode. I don't know if you have any thought provoking questions for Noel. I know you guys have I've known Noel probably as long, maybe longer, but you've had more close interactions with him at the TCC. Is there something you wanted to comment on or share? I'm just throwing it out there because you've been a pretty silent observer today.
No, I like listening. I'm
I
just
know.
waiting for my power to go out again. Actually, just joking. No, I like listening. They're all good. They're all good lessons. I mean, the rule number one when I teach people to prune, it's like the rule number one is trees don't need you. They don't need you to prune them. Um, so you have to balance that. What work you're going to do with a tree. So understanding it doesn't need you. Like tree can go through horrific storm damage. The only reason we're pruning is so it doesn't fall apart in the future. The tree don't care. It's like um, not to say that you can't pruning doesn't benefit trees and there's not health, but you have to keep a good perspective on it. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from pruning trees is not to put my aesthetic value on the tree, right? Just because it doesn't look like the classic white oak, grand, majestic thing doesn't mean it doesn't have value in the environment. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value for somebody sentimentally, right? It can have a lot of value. And that's a non-judgmental thing about trees I've tried to put into my own life too, right? Like not to be as judgmental as I have been in the past about people. Just because I don't see it their way doesn't mean my way's right and their way's wrong. It's just two ways, right? So, and it's odd now when I prune trees, sometimes it comes down to that, right? It's like, why am I making this cut? Like, why am I having this conversation? To me, they're almost the same conversation anymore, or the same question in my mind, right? Like, what value judgment am I putting on this tree to make this cut? Is it going to help the tree? Everything's a wound. Where do you want the rot to be? That's lesson number 2 of tree pruning. Lesson 1 is trees don't need you. Lesson 2 is every cut you make introduces a chance of rot. Where do you want it to go?
Yeah.
Two of the things that you just said that I've kind of had this like, now it just falls off your tongue because you've said it so many hundreds of times, but like people will call me out and they're like, what do I need to do to make this tree live? And I say it all the time, did you know that trees have lived millions of years without people? and so this is not about as much about making the tree live. This is about making it where this tree and you can share this space and you can feel like it's safe and it's attractive and it's sturdy and it's healthy. And, I want to do all of that for you, but the only reason that we're doing it is because you're sharing the space with it in your yard. If this tree was out in the middle of a dense forest, we wouldn't be talking about it. It would just be doing tree stuff. And then the second one that I hear like literally every week is people call me out and they're like, well, I want this tree shaped, and my answer is, and it sounds like I'm being a smart ass, and maybe I am, but my general answer is, right now it's tree shaped. What shape do you want it to be? And, a lot of people don't even realize that symmetry, shape, balance, that's something in your brain. That's not something that the tree needs at all. This tree has learned to grow just in exactly that shape that it's in. So, I'm not trying to unsell them or to tell them what they need, but I am the guy that will be honest with them about what's going to be best for the tree every time.
I mean, the arborist's biggest job is to be that interface between the tree doing tree stuff and the people doing people stuff. is to make those two aspects of our world merge as best as possible, right?
Yep.
Sometimes it doesn't work and the tree has to go, right? Sometimes it's past its own usefulness to a certain point, but other times people have to understand it's like it doesn't, just because it's not round doesn't mean it's bad, right?
For sure.
Yeah. I would always tell that when I taught at the college, uh, and before I developed the diploma program, which was more specifically had much more specific. There was four. It went from one arboriculture class that was a general class to like four more specialized classes. But in the general class that I used to teach, to hort students, it was one of the things I would talk about is, as an arborist, you're trying to blend what's best for the tree with what's best for the person, or somehow connect those two, not just be, because a lot of times what people want, they're not even considering, they're treating a tree almost like a building or an object. They want to paint it or just change it. You don't just renovate the tree to make it fit a space. It's not the same kind of a living thing, right? And trying to explain that in a way that help people understand, and also, um, with a certain amount of patience or kindness, because it can get really frustrating, especially when you realize someone just doesn't care. Then it gets really interesting. They don't really care about the fact that it's a tree and a living thing, and that's where I think, that's where I think Larry Hall got to that mystical component, because we actually care about the trees, and that's why we're bringing that in. We have some type of connection there. We want it to be cared for properly, which implies a sentiment, and and sometimes I think as arborists we're often guilty of caring for the trees more. It's something we teach tree appraisal, like, you gotta, like, we think the trees are more valuable than anything else in the property. Not that they're just part of the value of the property, but they are what's valuable in the property.
Yeah, it's hard to break people's um, you know old mindsets on stuff like that. And especially after you've had a big tornado or a big ice storm or whatever around here, it leads to several years of tree hate. People are it's fear, and whenever your next door neighbor's tree smashes their house and you've got the same kind of tree in your yard, it's easy to understand why they would have fear or be worried about that. Although that's a really good time to point out to people that the fact that your tree is still standing there after what just happened is quite a testament to its strength and ability to hold itself up and take care of itself. So just the fact that your tree didn't fall it says an awful lot about it. So
And why no one ever asked why their roof broke. Like why did my house break under that tree? Why isn't my house strong enough? Like, what about that? Like, maybe, it's always something else's fault. Like, well, maybe the roof wasn't strong enough. Obviously.
that's a hard sell, Dwayne. That's
Yeah,
one that I've never made to manage to sell.
I know. I don't. I've never tried it either, but I think of it sometimes. It was where I first was exposed to that concept. It was actually Broody. It was an SIA, an integrated assessment, the structural pull test stuff, and he was explaining how, the engineering perspective, like everything's built to standards, like buildings are built to specs and to withstand this much wind and that this, and so on. And trees can be measured to somewhat that degree. And he said a lot of the standards we hold trees to is we're saying trees need to be built to a higher standard or held to a higher structural stability standard than the buildings themselves, because the buildings have an engineered spec. They're made to withstand what's the worst case scenario, windstorm and ice and snow load, and they can be exceeded because buildings fail given the right circumstances. Even buildings fail. We don't build, and they could be built strong enough. It would cost a lot more money, and they'd be a lot bigger materials used, and they could be made so they never blow over or apart or rot. Depending on what you. But the cost of the construction, so it's balanced, right? why do we expect trees to have this, percent of safety factor that far exceeds that of engineered designs? Like, it didn't make, I was like, interesting, because in some ways that's what we were asking of them, right? Because a lot of times in these storm situations, it's not just trees that have failed. There's other failures have occurred on all sorts of structures. Power poles have broken, power lines have come down, uh, towers have failed, roofs have blown off. Like, these are all engineered structures that failed. They got overloaded. It's as simple as that, and it opened my eyes to that a little bit. And I never thought of it. Like, yeah, I guess you could build your house out of nothing but concrete, have steel girders for trusses. Like, it just ain't, you could drop an oak on it and it ain't going to budge it, but what's the cost of that house? But
Yeah, more than the average person is going to put into it. So
exactly. So it's but it was just an interesting way to look at it. When things fail, things fail. We don't need to blame it on one thing, or blame it on the tree. The tree wrecked my house. It wasn't strong enough. I don't want any of them around. Well, it was just one tree failed. Yeah, you know what I mean. It's but the one thing that's unique and for sure is it's always different. The people are different, the trees are different, the yards are different, and the interactions. There's a lot of similarities, but there's always a unique aspect to it.
I think that's why tree people love this job, is because it's not like we go and sit at the same desk and look at the same numbers or what. Like, every day is unique. The guys on the crew, every day their job is different than it was the day before. Every day the people that you deal with are different than they were the day before, and so this is definitely a job of variety. It's a job where you know where you get to, like, really test yourself all the time, because just when you think you got it all figured out, the thing that you thought that you were good at has a new twist and a new challenge to it. And I'm not just talking about the way you trim a tree. I'm talking about the way you deal with a customer, the way you treat your employees, the way you somehow try to keep all of your busted ass equipment up and running, the way, it's everything. You know, every day the challenge is going to be different than it was the day before.
Yes, sir. And variety is the spice of life, as they say. Well, I don't know who they is, but I've heard that said. Well, I'm you've got my mind thinking about your cabin and your little stretch of river. I definitely that sounds. I didn't realize it was that you always were going to the same spot and that you had this little special little place. Like, I see you comment often and show pictures of your boat and your fishing, but I didn't realize it was always in the same area.
Yeah, that little raft is just chained up to a pole on the side of the river, and when the river floods, it tosses it up onto the bank and breaks everything, and then I shove it back in the water again and keep it going. The river is, kind of like how our lives are always changing, and every day something different. You
Yep.
would think that I would get tired of going up that same stretch of river every Sunday, and it's not the same stretch of river every Sunday.
No.
It is constantly changing. The river looks so different now than it did 10 or 12 years ago, or 10 years ago when I bought my little cabin there. It's Mother Nature
Yeah.
dumps 12 inches of rain in 2 days, and the next time we show up, it's a whole new river.
It changes.
Big
I
big
think it.
trees jammed up, and gravel bars where there weren't gravel bars, and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's one of the real powerful benefits of having a daily practice or routine. Something that you do, whether it be weekly, daily, monthly, whatever, but you do it on a very regular cyclical basis because you get the opportunity to observe those subtleties. And sometimes they're quite powerful, like a 12-inch rain, you're going to see a lot of quite obvious change, but then even watching the change of that as it subsides and it evolves and the river changes, and like, or anytime you do something at the same location and follow a very similar routine or practice, you could even say it's with the competitions that happen once a year. There's a certain thing you get used to experiencing, and then you see the differences more clearly when you have that familiarity, if that makes any sense. Because you do it so frequently, you notice the differences so readily.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be some consistency that just goes hand in hand with the rules in the rule book. You got to. Although one of the things that's really happened is there's a lot of these unsanctioned TCCs all over the United States right now,
Oh yeah.
well, everywhere that are, you could, if it's not a sanctioned event, you can have whatever rules you want. And so, we go down to help out at the natural state comp every year in May, and it's not ISA sanctioned, and it's
Yeah.
down in Arkansas, and we get to the people that are running the show down there. They're like, all right, all about trees. You get that tree, make a work climb, make it whatever you want. And so we get to make up new rules and add extra obstacles. And
Yeah.
so it is kind of a fun thing to go take on an unsanctioned event because it gives you a little flexibility with how you
Yeah.
make it all work.
Yep. Absolutely. And there are a lot more of them coming up, and I think it's just a growth of the industry. It's just I don't think it's something that I know not everyone agrees with them, but I think as long as they're safe, which I think for the most part they are, then it's a good thing. Um, about the river too, I was just wanting to jump back. It's also not just the river that changes every week, right? You're different too in a lot of ways. We all your the experiences of that week, all the unique interactions. You have something different to ponder, something different to learn and think about. That's, I think, the whole concept of a day of rest, I think, is where that kind of comes from.
A lot of people, younger arborists, will ask me, advice, and probably what I give them consistently about arboricultural career is to find a practice or something like that that you can do on a regular basis that allows you to do that unwinding. I don't think it's something that I did early enough in my career. Um, you get to Friday, maybe you take 2 days off, maybe you get one day off. You just don't take the time to recover and do something different and get your mind right. And then you go back to it the next day and it just starts to build up over time. So I always recommend now to younger arborists, like, find something outside of tree work that gives you that way to cope with the stress of the work, with it, because it's a physically and it can be a very mentally demanding job. It's like, what, you're out there doing big technical removals, big technical tree work all week. When I was a crew leader, I had $250,000 worth of equipment, the reputation of my brother's company, and 2 or 3 other tree workers' lives on my hand. The decisions I made every day directly affected their families, and everybody. And I didn't see it for what it was, but it has a way of adding up on you. So I think, having something like that, whatever it might be, is is highly valuable. For me, when I was younger, I mean, it was like, hey, let's just drink a 6-pack every night. It's not a sustainable, not that sustainable, right? Not that I have anything against drinking a 6-pack, but it's not a good coping mechanism for a 30-year career, you know. But to have something that allows you that mental space, I guess, and that physical space sometimes to separate is very, very important. Very important. And like, I agree with Dwayne, if it can become a bit of a ritual, for lack of a better term, I think it has even more value, because then, going back to the tree climbing competition, I hated to see him get rid of the footlock, because the footlock was that one thing that ran through the competitions that you could say in 1998, you footlocked faster than Sam Noonan in 1985, because it was the same event. And we don't have that anymore. You can't compare and contrast like that anymore. And I think something got lost.
And I think the 6-pack thing, and I think substances or whatever, mind altering things, whether it be beer or whatever it is, and this industry has you know its fair share of it, I guess you could say. But um, I think even that the reason it has a draw and a it works, I guess you could say, is that because it gives us that glimpse into the a spiritual or different connecting side. Like it lets you relax, or it creates what you get on the river naturally, it creates artificially. It has that potential to do that for some, I think. And that's where the danger lies, is you got to blend that very carefully, the how you I think getting it naturally is a lot better for you in the long run. At least I think I certainly can attest to that in my life anyway. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I'll tell you this: every Sunday when I go to the river, I take a 6-pack of beer.
Yeah.
Oh, no way.
I'm. It's not that I couldn't, go and have a great time at the river, but Sunday is to me a celebration of the,
Yeah.
the end of the week and of my opportunity to, have a few minutes of time to go and just get on that river. And so, I usually have a buddy or two that goes with me every Sunday, and
Yeah.
that's just part of the ritual too.
Mhm.
At 52
Absolutely.
years old, I am a consummate professional beer drinker these days, because the days of just getting shit faced are gone, because that hurts
Yeah.
for 2 or 3 days every time. But to go have a couple or a few when you're at the river and just get to
Yeah.
that, it's about understanding where the level is. And
Absolutely.
so I don't mind getting a buzz on, but getting slobbering drunk is absolutely no fun anymore.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
Well, and you're not using it as an exclusive means. I was talking about, like, for me, it was the way. It was the trip up the river. It was on the boat. It was everything. It became everything at times. And I maybe that's happened for others, but it's different. You're using it. It's part of something. It's not the way. It's not and if someone forgot it, let's say, you wouldn't not go on the river. you know, like it wouldn't break the day. That's the I guess you can use the word responsible or whatever. I don't even know if that even is the right word, because it implies a misuse. It's just it's part of the whole concept. So um,
Yeah, I think my
and maybe we all can relate to having it been the primary mechanism of relief at times.
I
With
think my mistake was not realizing the value that it was a piece of the ritual, and then realizing the value of having that ritual, and then finding other ways to do it as well too. Right. That was my mistake. I could just it just became that just I never took time to recover. Right. It's like with any type of physical or mental job. If you don't take time to recover, you won't. And I didn't. You know, and I got fortunate that it never really caught up with me, but I see a lot of people that it does catch up with. And unfortunately, in our industry, it usually at work, it ends up pretty bad, right? Or life changing. And
well, it's
it's just
it's
not the
really
way it
pretty
should be.
damn hard to, especially if you're a young arborist and you work a heavy schedule all week, and you've got a wife at home, a couple of kids, or husband at home, a couple of kids, like whatever it is. It's exceedingly hard to carve out you time. And in my younger years, like, if I would have tried 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago, to say, hey, I'm going to the river every Sunday and going to get right, there, my wife probably wouldn't have cracked the whip, but I would have immediately felt the disappointment of her saying, hey, I've been while you've been at work, I've been, busting my ass trying to keep up with, everything else. And she works too. And we've got kids. And how about you, you know, stay home and, help me, clean up the mess of dirty diapers and all the trash cans and whatever else it is, so it's exceedingly hard for young people, especially young people with families, to find that time. And, sometimes it's just not realistic to think that you can make that a routine, and um, something you just have to work towards. I never could have done it, 15 years ago, and it's taken a long time for me to even work this little nugget of routine into my schedule. It's been hard. So it's easy to coach somebody to say, hey, make sure you go and take time, but there's life out there too that prevents that in so many cases, and so we just have to make do with what we've got.
Yeah. Well, and it's gradients, I think, as well. I think even in that younger age, it I find I need more rest and sleep. Like it takes me longer to recover from a lot of things at this age that it didn't back then. So even the amount of time that you need and what you do could be more refined or specific, not like simply because you are young, but it does like what it um, there's so many things that could bring that type of recovery to yourself, like for your body, mind, and soul, right? That wouldn't necessarily mean getting on a river and spending an afternoon on a boat. Like, I don't know. I'm just throwing out, I don't know what, but finding those little nuggets for you, maybe it's, I don't know. I've started doing meditating and there's apps out there for that. And you can pick how many minutes you have, if you got an hour or 5 minutes. And there's some 5-minute short meditations you can do where you just sit quietly and breathe and follow like someone's voice guiding you through what to do. That can be incredibly restorative, even and even making that a habit can have a lot of effect. How you breathe, noticing how you breathe. That's one that's become to my light just recently, and noticing when my breathing changes and being conscious of that and what causes my breathing to change has been quite an interesting exercise. And little things like that, maybe could offer into there's really a lot of resources out there or ways to restore yourself, I guess you could say, or reconnect with your own where you're at, I suppose. But you're absolutely right. I really appreciate that comment, Noel, because nothing worse than some old guy telling you what you need to do and how to do it when dude, I ain't 50 something and I don't have a cabin by the river and I got wives at home and I got payments and I got to do buzzies on the weekend, brother. Like you definitely hit on something there, and that's true. You got to respect that, right?
Yep.
I think there's ways to find balance around it, right? Like when I was in my 20s and 30s, I couldn't have devoted as much time to get my head right for certain things, but I wish I would have seen the opportunities where they were, like when I could come home and read a book to my daughter when she was younger. Maybe that 5 minutes, and I did do that. I didn't realize the value of it at the time, and that's what I try and point out to people, to understand, like Dwayne said earlier in your life, it's probably going to be little nuggets of stuff, but look for them and find them, and then maybe later in life you can build it into something much bigger, and do the best you can. But take the time to look for it. No one told me to look. I just tell people to look now.
Well, if I could stack onto this conversation, I don't know how long you guys want me to keep blabbering on here about any of it, but one of the things that I think one of the biggest struggles, especially with the young people that work for me right now, is the sense of interpersonal connection has really become lost. We're got this social media, in your phone at all times, and you're connected with people on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is. But the truth is, the connections are superficial. They're not real. They're, and one of the things that I'm able to do, besides going to the rivers, we're empty nesters now. The kids are gone. They're, my oldest one is married. My youngest one's getting married here in May, and they've flown the coop. And, whether it's, a chance for you to go and, go to the gym and be around people, or go to, in my case, not to get back to the whole beer conversation, but, my wife and I, we have a little neighborhood brewery where we go there a couple nights a week, and it's not about going there to drink beer. Like, no. It's our neighborhood. It's where the people are. It's where our friends. Every time we walk in that door, there's people that we know, and we sit down with people or even total strangers and have conversations with them. I think that we're really lost right now. Everybody is burrowed into their own world. And I think that a lot of the mental issues and the lack of mental health is because people don't have the level of interpersonal communication and bonding and
Yeah.
comfort that we all had before any of that social media crap came up.
Yeah.
And so, that my crew in the morning, I've got guys that work for me that literally the other guys on my crew are, not maybe their only friends, but some of their only friends. And I make sure that we've got a half hour every morning for the guys to just sit down together and connect with each other and have conversations, or, just to feel like you're have a moment to just like relate with another human being in a personal way.
Yeah.
And tell stories about what you did last night, or,
Yeah.
what are you going to do this weekend? And what about that crazy shit that happened on that job yesterday, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think that time, even though I know it's expensive time for me, it's valuable to the sanity and to the mental stability of everybody out there. I think that a lot of people don't take the time to interact with humans in a healthy way.
Man, that's my most favorite part of this podcast so far today, Nolan. And I'm so glad you shared that. I agree 100%. And I think social is, as much as it has helped to some degree, like I know something about some of my high school buddies that I wouldn't know without some of it, but it's also dangerously simplified, and everything on there is always great, and it's hard to see reality. I think it skews our vision, our perception of what reality is in human connection and relationship, and it's one of the reasons, you know I try to talk about the human force and our connections that we learn from as people working together. And all our connections happen to be tree people, so we have a kind of a tree theme to it. But I really think there is a need for that, and exactly what you said, and learning how to connect. And the pandemic really put a real wedge in that, like as far as keeping people apart. And we have a bit of a. I think it's important to bring awareness to our need to draw that back together and draw time for people to interact. Here we're doing it in a way on an audio format that people can listen to, but I hope it does inspire people to spend time in that personal context and talking about life, and the stories you mentioned, like what went good, what went bad, and what is going hard. Like on social, you don't see that. All you see is what's going great.
Well, and the other, I guess the last point on this is I think that it's critical that we interact with people that don't think or believe the things that we think or believe. Like everybody is so backed into two corners right now. And I'm not just talking about politically. It is political,
Right.
but everybody is basically backing into echo chambers right now. It is so easy to just get in a group of people that look like you, talk like you, think like you, act like you. And man, if you're not out there mixing it up with people who don't think like you, who don't look like you, who don't act like you, you are completely missing the human forest. You're missing the experience of life. And I can't tell you how many friends of mine that literally choose who is in their friend circle based on who you casted a ballot for in the last election.
Yeah.
And what an enormous mistake that is.
Yeah.
Like what a shame to miss out on the diversity of viewpoint, of opinion. I feel sad for where our society is right now, because I'm just going to, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I got to say this. They did a poll back in like 1985 or 1984 in the presidential election. And I'm sure I could come up with the data, but let's say that there's 20,000 counties in the United States,
Yeah.
Back in 1985, there was like 1,500 counties that were blowout, like heavily weighted Democrat or Republican blowout, more than 25% difference. Now it's like over 50% of the counties in the United States are blowouts. everybody is moving into their corners. Like everybody's moving to the places where with only like-minded people around them. And I feel like that's gonna ruin us.
Yeah.
The diversity of outcomes and opinions is what makes us all understand each other, and all of us backing into, on all of the real estate listings now, you can go to real estate listings and you can find out, whatever radius around this house, how people voted in the last election, so that you can make sure that you get back into your corner with them. It's just crazy to me.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, well, again, you got my vote, so to speak, to make a play on what you're talking about. I agree 100%, and I'd like to think that we're going to see a trend of that in society take place. I hope. Um, we don't have a set time for the podcast. No, we don't. Typically, this is around the time, and we also understand that you're working man, and you're in your truck, and we want to respect that too. So, I think this is a great note to sign off on. I want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing your time, your knowledge, your experience, strength, and hope with us today. It was awesome, and thank you very much.
I'm always glad to do it, and thank you guys for putting me on. I have a hard time envisioning who's going to find all of my ramblings interesting, but I hope that they do.
And so do we, and I'm sure they will.